Today we're going to talk about Ozempic. Ozempic is becoming a very popular drug, especially for weight loss, although its main implication is for type 2 diabetes. I keep hearing about celebrities and influencers using it to lose weight, so I thought to myself, why not make a video so I can learn and so you guys can learn too. So let's get into it. So what is Ozempic? So Ozempic goes by the brand names Ozempic and Wegovy. It is a drug called semaglutide. This is it right here. Semaglutide is a GLP-1 receptor agonist, which means that it helps turn on this thing called a GLP-1 receptor. It is a glucagon-like peptide. We'll talk about what glucagon is. A peptide is a structure that has a short chain of amino acids. Proteins are structures that have long chains of peptides. So to make a long story short, this drug is used to manage type 2 diabetes. It's also used to manage HbA1c to lower that blood sugar and for weight loss, specifically weight management. And this is all meant to be used with a reduced calorie diet and exercise, just like any medication that lowers blood sugar. In 2021, semaglutide was approved for weight management. So I say that because this is not a weight loss drug. The main purpose is not weight loss. It can be used to help someone lose weight when it comes to managing weight, lifestyle, and blood sugar. So this was approved for weight management in adults who are obese or overweight with at least one weight-related condition. So from what I understand, if your BMI is greater than 27, then this applies. So for example, if you're 5'6", 170, your BMI would be greater than 27, a little bit higher than 27. So I just want to mention BMI, in my opinion, is a little bit outdated. It doesn't take into account the person's race, how their body is structured, and a whole bunch of other things. I think BMI has its uses for applications, especially when it comes to someone who's very big. But overall, I think it could be a little bit inaccurate as a measure of health for every single person. For example, a lot of people are technically overweight, but not necessarily unhealthy. But the whole idea is this drug is for the person who is struggling with their weight, has high blood sugar, which both go hand in hand when it comes to diabetes, and they need to help lose that weight so they can become a healthier person overall. And so these weight-related conditions can be things like high blood pressure, diabetes. So in this context, it can be given to someone who, let's say they're very overweight and have high blood pressure, and can be given to them to help manage their weight. So the typical dosing is about a one-time weekly injection. On a website that I like to go to talk about drugs or learn about them, it says also 1 pill daily. I don't think this is used, at least not right now. I got a lot of my information from the FDA website and the Ozempic website, so it doesn't seem like the pill is really used that much. After about 12 weeks, research showed that your fasting blood sugar gets lowered, your insulin gets raised, which we'll talk about. It's a molecule that helps store sugar in the cells, and your glucagon gets lowered. Glucagon helps release sugar. This drug can be used indefinitely. From the research I did, it seems like after a year, a lot of people stop using it, but it can be used for a long time as long as it's tolerated, especially if someone has a very difficult time with weight loss. It's not perfect. For some people it can work well, but it does not work well for others. It's not a magic drug, but for those who use it, it seems to be really effective for blood pressure, but especially losing weight. Let's talk about blood sugar and type 2 diabetes. Greater than 90% of diabetics have type 2 diabetes. The crazier stat to me is 1 in 10 Americans have type 2 diabetes, which is crazy to me. But being in America and looking around me every day, I'm not surprised. The thing about type 2 diabetes is that it's pretty much completely preventable. For, I think, almost every case, it has to do with diet. The big issue here being something called insulin resistance. As I mentioned, obesity is a huge issue in the United States. We just like processed foods, excess carbohydrates, excess sugars. We have a lot of high fructose corn syrup and stuff, which is incredibly damaging to the human body. I try to eat as healthy as I can, but I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't enjoy things like brownies or French fries or donuts. I know they're not good for me, and I have them every now and again, but I often have to make sure I don't overindulge because it's just not good for my body. The whole piece here for this whole slide is homeostasis. Homeostasis is constant process your body uses to stay stable and for all of its functions to be working smoothly. So let's talk about what happens when you eat some carbohydrates and they move through your body. This is a very basic overview. You consume some carbohydrates and they're broken down into sugars. Carbohydrates are just big structures linked with a lot of sugar. Your blood sugar rises and your pancreas releases what's called insulin. So let's zoom in here. The pancreas is a really interesting organ. This is it right here, this yellow looking thing. It's connected to the first part of the small intestine, also the spleen. It sits under the liver next to the gallbladder, and it does a lot of really important things. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the pancreas releases insulin, glucagon, a whole bunch of other things. Things like cholecystokinin, this helps process fats in the body. Ghrelin is what helps regulate our hunger, but these hormones are really important. So insulin, in a nutshell, helps store the sugar into the cells. Glucagon helps release that sugar when your blood sugar is low. So this is the little game, the dance your body does to balance your blood sugar, along with all sorts of other processes. This is just one of the many. So if the pancreas is bombarded with too much sugar over time, just over and over and over, those overconsumption of carbohydrates and sweets and corn syrup, the body stops responding well and the sugar isn't stored properly. So here's what I mean. I always talk about these things called receptors, which these structures will kind of plug into to turn on a function. So here, let's say we have insulin and our insulin receptor. Our body expresses these receptors. On the cells, it'll hold the balance so the molecules can bind and then put the sugar into the cells. The issue is when you keep consuming excess sugar, the body stops expressing these receptors. Well, why? Because it's overloaded and it's like, hey, I'm not gonna keep putting out these things to keep storing more sugar because we're getting way too much. This is just a part of the bodily process to try to maintain some balance. But the issue is that because the insulin can't connect, then you have all this sugar moving through your blood and it can cause a whole host of issues. This is just a very, very basic breakdown. There's a lot more to it. So how does semaglutide work in a nutshell? So I mentioned it is a GLP-1 agonist. So let's break that down. What is GLP-1? GLP-1 decreases blood sugar levels. It's one of the many peptides that function in the body for that homeostasis. So it increases insulin secretion. We talked about insulin storing that sugar. It reduces glucagon secretion. We talked about how glucagon breaks down that sugar so our body can use it as energy when our blood sugar is low. And it slows the food down from moving from the stomach to the intestines, the small intestines. This, all in all, is a recipe for lower blood sugar, and you have less desire to eat. And so this is what is assumed to be the mechanism for weight loss, reduced appetite, and food cravings. Now, what is an agonist? An agonist helps turn on a function. It helps turn on something. So a GLP-1 agonist will activate that receptor to turn on these functions. Ozempic is an analog. What is an analog? I've mentioned this before, but receptors are kind of structured to fit the molecules that connect with them. So let's go over here. So think about when you were younger and you had those, well, if you can remember being this young, but you see kids, for example, and they have those little toys where you can fit the cubes into a square hole or a sphere into a circle-shaped hole. Think about that being receptors, right? You're gonna put a square block into a square hole. You're not gonna put a round sphere into a square hole because it's not gonna fit. So the analog will kind of mimic that shape so it can connect to that receptor and turn on those functions, as I mentioned here. You can also consider it like a fingerprint sensor. Fingerprint sensors are specific to a fingerprint. And if you think of receptors being a fingerprint sensor type of thing where you have multiple structures with a specific type of fingerprint that can fit in there and turn on a function. So the bulk of this video is talking about Ozempic when it comes to weight loss. So let's talk about the clinical trials. I got this from the FDA website, kind of did an overview of the Ozempic clinical trial for weight management. So there are about 4 68-week trials, 2,600 people, a little bit more than that received Wegovy. This is, another brand name for semaglutide for up to 68 weeks. 1,500 received placebo. There were 2 main pieces, a non-diabetic trial, 74% women, 231 pounds average weight, 38 BMI is the average BMI, which is pretty high. And the diabetic trial, 51% women, 220 pounds, 36 BMI. So if you break down the numbers, 12.4% of people in the non-diabetic trial saw loss of initial weight, and 6.2% of the diabetic trial saw loss of initial weight. So it was pretty effective. Again, these are the raw numbers. It's not a magic drug. Just like any drug, for those it works for, it works well, but it's not going to work well for everyone. Although it seems like, from what I've read and seen, it's a pretty effective drug at helping people lose weight. As always, there's side effects. I always like to talk about this. Now, when I'm listing these side effects aren't always going to happen. There are some that are more common than others, but I wanted to give you the full profile, at least what I saw from the FDA website. Gastrointestinal side effects seem to be very common. So things like nausea, headache, fatigue. What I understand about this is that this can be related to low blood sugar, things like indigestion, dizziness, abdominal bloating, hypoglycemia in patients with type 2 diabetes, as in low blood sugar, pretty much too low of blood sugar. Because you want your blood sugar low, but you don't want it too low. There's got to be that balance, that homeostasis. Flatulence, gastroenteritis, acid reflux, many of these you're seeing to be gastrointestinal side effects. It's not recommended for people with a personal or family history of thyroid cancer. There is a risk of thyroid C-cell tumors. There is risk for things like pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas, gallbladder problems, low blood sugar, kidney injury, diabetic retinopathy, which is a damaging of the eye tissue due to high blood sugar, increased heart rate, suicidal behavior, thinking. If you're using insulin, then you're going to want to talk with your doctor about a possible decrease of that insulin when you use Wegovy or Ozempic. And I know I just sounded like those pharmaceutical commercials that make people seem like the drug is going to take all their problems away, and then it lists all those crazy side effects. But this is what we got to talk about. So in order to reduce the GI side effects, the data I saw said the dose must be increased over 16 to 20 weeks up to 2.4 milligrams as far as the dosage. So this is what I saw on the FDA website. This seems to be, at least from their data, the most effective way to reduce those side effects. Notice it's a very slow increase. Your body needs to get time to adjust because you're messing with the hormones, you're messing with some of these delicate biological processes. So it's not an overnight thing, which is why it's really important to take it under the supervision of a doctor, because it's not magic. So lastly, let's talk about the dosing schedule. This is what I got from the Ozempic website. So an injection 1 time weekly along with diet and exercise, like I mentioned before. You start with about 0.25 milligrams weekly for the first 4 weeks, and you stay on about 0.5 milligram weekly for at least 4 weeks. Again, this is managing of blood sugar. So additional dosing can be needed for people if they need more blood sugar regulation. So at least 1 milligram weekly for the first 4 weeks. If you need some extra help, 2 milligrams weekly if you need more help. As I mentioned before, this is slow increase because our body needs to get used to what's going on. This can be taken with or without food. So I want to mention a point here. If anyone takes it, or any physicians that are watching the video, if you can comment any things you've noticed with the dosing schedule or its effect with weight loss, I'd love to see it, because it's kind of hard to get a real world data set from just looking at research papers and stuff like that. It is a little expensive. From what I saw, it's about $900 a month for a month-long supply. This is just a general number. I know in some cases it's not covered by insurance, especially if you take it for more of a weight loss type of thing. But again, I'm not keen on all the details, but I do know it's pretty pricey. So I have a lot of questions when it comes to this. Ozempic's been out for a few years, but it's so popular now because it's being used by people, in my opinion, that don't need this drug. How safe is this as a weight loss drug? I mentioned it is not a weight loss drug. That's not its main purpose, but it can be used for weight management. I just want to know how safe it is. I know that some people can't tolerate the side effects. This drug is not perfect, so there's definitely going to be some downsides. What's the long-term safety? So it doesn't seem like people are on this thing forever, but if you're on it more than a year, I wonder how this is affecting the body. What damage is being done, if any? How's it affecting your metabolism? What happens after you stop it? How quickly do you gain weight? How does your body bounce back from that GLP-1 agonist? And I live in Florida. We have these weight loss clinics I just found out about. Look, I think that there are a lot of physicians who are really doing things right, really trying to help their patients, but you cannot be naive and think that some physicians don't see this as a cash grab. And in my opinion, these celebrities and influencers who are taking this drug that do not need it, I think you're seeing some of that sketchiness, because there are people that genuinely need this drug, that it helps. But if you got people that don't need it and they're managing to get it, it kind of, in my opinion, it kind of can make medicine look bad a little bit. But that's just me. I'm not a doctor. I just think that with something like this, it might be helpful to have more control over who actually gets it, because it seems like there's a lot of gray area when it comes to how you can prescribe it. Another big thing is follow the money. It's unfortunate that the medicine landscape is what it is, but there's a big opportunity for people to make a lot of money prescribing this drug, especially the people that don't actually need it. So anyway, let's go through the summary and review what we learned. So we started out talking about semaglutide, this GLP-1 receptor agonist that can manage type 2 diabetes and help people manage weight. In 2021, it was approved for weight management in people who were obese or overweight with at least one weight-related condition. It's a one-time weekly injection that can reduce that blood sugar. Then we talked about type 2 diabetes. 1 in 10 Americans have it. And when you consume carbohydrates, it's broken down into sugars. Your pancreas releases insulin and glucagon to help regulate that blood sugar. If it keeps being bombarded by too much sugar, it's not gonna respond well, and the sugar can't be stored properly. We talked about how the GLP-1 agonist decreases blood sugar levels, raises glucagon secretion, it slows food moving from the stomach to small intestines, and Ozempic fits into that receptor and turns on that function to do those same things, like GLP-1. Then we talked about the clinical trials, specifically the weight management clinical trials, the non-diabetic and diabetic trials. And we talked about the side effects, the GI side effects, the other side effects that are noteworthy when it comes to taking this drug. Then we ended out talking about the dosing schedule, the doses you start with, the dose you stay with, any doses that are needed for regulation. One thing I didn't mention is I don't really know what the schedule is for the weight management. I'd assume that it's just this, or maybe you only stick with 0.25. I don't really know. So if anyone can comment, that'll be great. I should have looked it up, but I just thought about it now. It's pretty expensive. And I also mentioned the questions I have about not only how it's used as far as safety, but also how it's used when it comes to people that don't actually need it. I think sometimes there can be a lot of sketchy stuff in medicine, and I wouldn't be surprised if this drug was a part of some of that sketchiness in a certain context. I'm not saying every doctor prescribes it to make a lot of money, but I just think about the pill mills in South Florida where they were just handing out opioids like candy. Obviously, these are not opioids, but when I think about how this can be prescribed, I'm just seeing a lot of money that can be made, and with that, there can be some corruption. Like I said before, I'm not in this world, but these are just my looks at it as an outsider. So anyway, this video is long enough. I hope you guys learned a lot. I really like doing research for this video specifically because I keep hearing about Ozempic, so I thought to myself, why not do some research and make a video? As always, thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll be back soon with another video.